The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course.
The best Pixar movies.
Oh.
Ooh. They're all the best.
Hang on, I need the list in front of me.
So just before the discussion, I haven't seen all the Pixar movies. I haven't seen Good Dinosaur.
I haven't seen that one either.
I think there's maybe one other.
No one thinks it's the best Pixar movie, though, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, I haven't seen them all. There might be another one that I've seen. I've seen
Have you seen
most
the Cars
of them.
movies?
No. Mm-mm.
So Cars 3, I think, is actually extremely underrated.
Really?
Like Cars 2 is
I didn't
pretty
see
lame.
it because of Cars 2.
Cars 2 is
It's
pretty lame.
whatever.
But
In the
Cars
Planes
3,
one.
Planes is not Pixar. That's Disney.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought they were connected.
I mean, they're definitely visually connected, and there might be similar producing or something. I'm not sure what the relationship is there, but it's not a Pixar movie. Cars 3 is actually quite good. I was very pleased with Cars 3.
What makes it good?
I don't think I could explain it without spoiling it in a way that would then diminish the goodness of it. So I'm not willing to do
that's
it.
Fine.
But I think it's still on Netflix. Just watch it.
Can I watch it without watching the other two?
You should watch Cars 1 first, but Cars 2, I don't think does anything important.
No one cares about Cars 2.
My wife likes Cars 2. She thinks it's charming, and that's fine. And it has its moments. We watched it together, and it was better than I thought it would be.
Okay.
But it's certainly not up to the standards of other Pixar. But Cars 3 is actually quite solid.
So as far as Pixar goes, I'm certainly old school. Toy Story does it for me. I'm sorry, but I love Toy Story.
It's really good.
So good.
Toy Story is amazing.
I mean, Inside Out.
Toy Story 3 is good too.
I think we've talked as a team before about Inside Out. Maybe not on the podcast, but brilliantly done.
I think it's I think that's number one for me.
Okay.
For me, it's the number one movie, period. It is literally the perfect film for me. The number one spot's kind of easy.
Right.
At least for me, it's easy. But what about number 2 or 3?
I think Up and Wall-E probably for me.
Up and Wall-E.
I've only seen Wall-E once, and I wasn't all that impressed by it. I should see it again.
That happened to me the first time too. You got to see it again.
And keep in mind, I was quite young when it still came out.
Sure, that's another problem. I
Maybe
guess the
I
same
just didn't
problem for
appreciate
me in Ratatouille. I've only seen it once. I think if I saw it again, I probably like it a lot more than I did the first time.
See, I saw it a second time recently. I had similar feelings.
No,
and I just have a really hard time getting past the hair pulling makes his arms move. That's just so hard for me to get past. And that is a central dynamic of what drives the film. And it's just really distracting. I can't do it. He's even it still works while he's sleeping. There's a scene where he's literally asleep and the rat is making him interact with the girl and by pulling on his hair. I can't get past it.
That's an interesting thing.
It's a cute movie.
Where sometimes we can suspend our disbelief and sometimes we can't based on what's going on, right?
There's certain things that are a lot easier.
I can buy the talking golden retriever and Up.
No problem.
Yep.
Easy peasy.
Technology exists. Fine.
Right.
Move on.
I can buy the talking rat in Ratatouille, but then he's pulling on the guy's hair and that's causing him to be like a puppet.
It's like telepathy.
I don't think so. It's too much.
I think so. Up isn't really in my top 3. And the reason for that, the beginning is amazing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of the movie, I feel like it just doesn't live up to the expectation it sets at the beginning. So I don't think it's in my top 3.
I think we could all agree that the first 5 minutes of Up are the best 5 minutes of Up.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's still a great movie after that. And so I think that's unfair criticism.
If it didn't have the talking dog, I might be more with you. But I feel like it's already good, and you add the awesome talking dog, and I'm like, I love this.
I guess that doesn't do it for me though, because I don't really like animals, and so the talking dog, I'm like,
well, you're not going to like a lot of these then. There's a lot of animals in Pixar movies.
I know.
So I have a clear top 5,
all right.
And you've named 3 of them. So Inside Out, Wall-E, and Up, I think are all clear top 5.
Can I guess the other 2?
By all means.
Toy Story and Toy Story 3?
Toy Story 3, yes. Toy Story, no. Toy Story would be in the second tier. Toy Story is great. Toy Story 3 is amazing.
It made every 90s kid cry.
Oh my gosh. The fact that they pulled off the ending the way that they did is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really good film.
Bug's Life?
No. Bug's Life is pretty low, actually.
Okay. Kevin Spacey is amazing in Bug's Life.
He's very funny in it.
That. I don't think it's going to be Monsters, Inc. I
No.
doubt it's Finding Nemo.
No. Good.
It's Coco?
I haven't seen Coco. Really want to, but I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen.
Coco, we just saw Coco this week. It was better than I thought it was going to be. It's not going to be in my top 5, but it was the trailer seems so weird. It's kind of like, I don't really get it, but like
it was a weirdly advertised movie.
Yeah, it's just a very strange concept, but you get used to the concept very quickly, and you just kind of find with the universe. As a guitarist, like here's like a little known thing. Like I'm watching his hands. They correctly animated every single note and chord that is played on the guitar, which I don't think has been done before. So I was like literally, you could watch him play and be like, oh, that's how to play these songs. So it's like. That's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. Okay, so what's your other one? I'm not looking at the list, so I don't think I can guess it.
It's The Incredibles.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. That should have been really obvious.
I just forgot to, all right. I think The Incredibles.
Bethany and I rewatched it recently in like preparation for Incredibles 2. And this movie is so well written. Mm-hmm. The interplay between the characters is so good. It's so realistic family dynamic stuff.
Yes.
That the back and forth between the husband and the wife is real, and it's convincing and compelling, and you're sympathetic to both sides. And how miserable he looks in this tiny little car in the office with a giant pillar going through it and everything. It's wonderful. The way it's shot, the scene where with his boss before he punches his boss through the wall. Yeah, he's like, "I'm not happy, Bob." Like that whole scene, like the way that scene is shot, and like emphasizes like his little hands and what his little hands are doing and everything. Just absolutely wonderful movie.
Not happy, Bob is definitely in my wife and I's lexicon of things that we say.
It's so good,
more often than I wish.
So that's my humble opinion. That's my top 5.
Yeah.
Any
I
other?
Agree. I agree with this top 5.
So my question for you, Tim, is: do you think Incredibles 2? Are you open to it possibly knocking something out of the top 5? Like, could it knock the original? I don't know how good Incredibles 2 is going to be.
I consider myself an open-minded person, so of course I'm open. Am I optimistic? I'm somewhat optimistic. I've got a lot of faith in Pixar. I've heard really good things about it. I've heard like pretty consistent, like this. It's up to high Pixar standards. If I had to guess, I would guess that it's not as good as Incredibles 1 because it's an incredibly high bar to meet. Mm-hmm. But of course I'm open and hopeful. Like I want it to be. I want it to be amazing.
I'm one of those people that I would feel like unjust including like Incredibles 1 and 2 in my top 5. Feels like an imbalance or something. You know what I mean? I like to have like one from each different storyline.
If 1 and 2 are both the best, then include them. if Toy Story 1 is like it's a really, really good. I think Toy Story 3 edges it out. I'm not kicking out Toy Story 1 because I think, well, there's already a Toy Story movie in my top 5. Like I just think that the other films are all better.
That's really fair.
Like you can set it up where from the beginning there's a rule you can only have one film from each franchise kind of series or something like that. Like you can do that, but that was not in the rule.
I think that's cheating. I think if you think Toy Stories 1, 2, and 3 in that order are the number 1, 2, and 3 Pixar movie, like go for it.
It's fine.
I think it's fine in the rules. In my personality, it makes me feel weird to do that. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because I was like debating like top 10 movies of all time with people. And like some people wanted to include multiple Star Wars films in the first, like in the, top 10. And it's like, no, let's just like keep one of them and the rest, like you can't, I don't know. I don't want to do that.
Okay. But then what about Lord of the Rings? How can you not include multiple Lord of the Rings movies unless you just consider them all one unit?
Some people were arguing that it should be considered one movie. And I was like,
does that include the prequels or just the original trilogy?
No, just,
the Hobbit's garbage.
It's not going to make the top 10.
Yeah. Or top.
I'm just saying, like,
whatever.
if they say that every franchise has to be considered in its whole, then that means that the Lord of the Rings should go down basically in the list because you got to bring in the Hobbit, right?
So, no. So
you treat them as different.
I think what you could argue is that certain franchises have internal consistency that make it so it's appropriate to treat them as a whole and others don't. So for instance, Star Wars, you've got different directors, different visions, different time periods, very different styles. The tone of these Star Wars prequels are very different than the original trilogy. And so you legitimately say this is not a unit. You could maybe say that the original trilogy is a unit. But I think you could make that argument. But certainly it's not at the same unit as like the prequels or the new movies. These are very different tones. Whereas the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King, that's a lot more plausibly. Yeah, they filmed them at the same time.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
Same crew. Everything was the same. The vision was the same. I think there's at least a legitimate argument to consider.
That's fair. Just as real quick, too, really funny Star Wars quotes. Just the way you were telling that story reminded me. Remember, there was a CGP Grey Ask Me Anything where someone asked what order CCP Grey thinks that they ought to watch the Star Wars movies. He says 4, 5, 6. I
think he said 4, 5, 6, 7.
4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, this might have been after Force Awakens came out. But then also, I don't know if you guys saw the tweet. There are pretty snarky people running Star Wars Twitter, like the official Star Wars account. So someone had posted something that's like, man, I just really want one of these Star Wars character movies to be focused on Darth Vader. And they said, watch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. So someone who has followed my work sent me a Facebook message, I don't know, a month or two ago, asking me for kind of my reaction to a video that I had not seen, but it had been posted on Facebook. So I'm going to link to it. It's a very pro-choice video. And I gave him kind of some quick, off the top of my head, thoughts, but I thought this would be a good thing for us to talk about, given that this is a kind of an argument that we haven't spent a ton of time talking about on the podcast. It's certainly being talked about a lot right now. But also, I think as I watched this video, I felt like this is one of the better versions of this, kind of an argument, or kind of a, like, someone trying to use video or story to persuade people along these lines. I thought it was very effective in certain ways. So I thought, let's use this as kind of a launching point into this kind of topic of what are the potential negative consequences of making abortion illegal. So we're going to talk about the video, but then I know Rachel's also been doing some research into some like other things he wants to kind of bounce into, and I don't even know what all those things are. So I'm excited about whatever phase 2 is going to be. But for a while, I just want us to talk about this video. And so I would encourage you, if you're listening to this, I think it would be worth you taking, what is it, like 4 minutes long or something like that?
It's
like just take 7 minutes or whatever it is and watch the video. So you can kind of get a sense, not just of the arguments that are being made in the video that we're obviously going to respond to and attempt to counter, but also get a sense of what I'm saying. Like, does everyone agree this is a very rhetorically powerful video?
Oh yeah.
Although if you're listening to this podcast while you're driving or something, you're kind of out of luck because everyone's speaking in like Spanish or something, different language. Yeah. And you got subtitles. So you have to be able to watch it.
Or speak Spanish. If you speak Spanish, then you're golden. So pause. Okay. You should pause the podcast and go, okay, so now we're back. All right. So the first thing going on, there's a main argument going on in this video, which is that basically abortion laws, or like anti-abortion laws, can cause women to be jailed for miscarriage. Like there's these unjust ramifications that happen where it's certainly implied very strongly that some of these women that they show in this El Salvadoran jail were not only is it like wrong that they're in jail because they had an abortion and women shouldn't have jail sentences for having abortions, but it's like they're implying they just had spontaneous miscarriages, and due to, whatever, a messed up criminal justice system or whatever, they're stuck in jail because they've been falsely imprisoned to this anti-abortion law thing.
And in one case in the video, even she was raped and then had a miscarriage and then was jailed.
Right.
So like double whammy of like, this is like so unjust.
Right. So it's like, I think like the most obvious thing that we will say all day, but let's just get it out. Like, of course it would be really unjust if anybody, like anytime anyone goes to prison for a thing they didn't do, obviously that's unjust. Like, it's really, really, really wrong. Really, really, really tragic. I think everyone agrees that shouldn't happen. And so
miscarriage is certainly not a crime.
Yes.
And no one should be jailed for miscarriage.
Yes. If you're pro-choice and listening to this and you're thinking maybe pro-life people are like, they think fetuses are so sacred that they think that there's something like you've sinned or done something bad or you're being punished if you have a miscarriage. No one thinks that. Like, no reasonable person thinks that.
And to go even a little farther, as terrible as it is to kill the unborn intentionally, it is so bad to wrongfully punish an innocent person for doing that the burden of proof should be on the side that's arguing that someone did intentionally do this. Yep. And so not only is it the case that it's bad and shouldn't happen, but also the burden of proof is on the other side because it's so bad to jail an innocent person for miscarriage.
And to me, like that, sort of criminal justice philosophy is so important that I freely acknowledge that it might be true that making sure that we continue, at least in America, like I'm not in control of what goes on in El Salvador, but like every criminal justice system,
what's going on in America either.
Yeah, I know. I'm not actually pulling all
I
the
know
strings.
what you mean. I'm just being difficult.
Clearly, every good, I would argue that any country's criminal justice system should also do that thing of saying you are innocent until proven guilty. In fact, I don't think America even goes far enough on that. So I'm concerned about, for example, the way like journalism treats criminal cases, where people are like, their names are in all these articles before there's this,
absolutely,
before they're sentenced. And it's like, even if they're innocent, like probably their life is really, really messed up now. Yeah, so like,
exactly.
I'm completely, so all that being said, as a pro-life person, an argument sometimes gets made like, how are you going to enforce a ban on abortion given that it's going to look a lot like a miscarriage? And I don't have all the answers to that. I don't think that proves it should not be against the law.
We did address that question also in a previous podcast where we talked about what should women be punished if abortion becomes illegal.
Right. But like, I would say like, even if it's true, and I don't know if it is, like, and who knows what scientific, tests there will be in 20, 30, 40 years. But even if it was true that the only way to make sure that we put people in jail for having abortions, if that is even what society was saying we ought to do, clearly it is still more important to have the presumption of innocence, even if that means that very few people end up going to jail for abortion. Like maybe in the end, that just means that abortion practitioners are going to go to jail because we'll never have enough evidence to prove that any particular woman had an abortion. I mean, that's like an overstatement. Like clearly that's not always going to be the case. But even if that meant most people didn't go to jail, even if they ought to, I'm still saying, yes, of course, presumption of innocence until proven guilty is a really important thing in any criminal justice system.
Yes.
And I think the overall like kind of argument or intention behind this video is that this is why criminalizing abortion doesn't work. Like that's their argument.
Right.
And I think it's really important to look at what's going on in El Salvador and what's going wrong there.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into the data a little bit later, but I think there are some things that they're doing that they're not handling illegal abortion correctly. And I think that the argument and the rhetorical force behind this video is, look, they're not doing it the correct way in El Salvador. So in America, if we did it, we would also mess it up. And I think that there's a lot of cultural factors that would make that statement untrue, but that's not something which is explicit and obvious when watching the video.
Yeah, there's a lot of hidden premises in this video. And we at ERI don't like hidden premises. We like them to be drawn out. Listen to the Trot, the Toddler module. So I haven't done the research on El Salvador that you have. So I'm definitely interested in us getting into like those specifics because this video especially was about the El Salvador thing. But like just my reaction watching it was, gee, like for maybe assuming it's true that there are women here that are in jail just because they had a spontaneous miscarriage, like beyond that's really sad and unjust and wrong. It's like maybe El Salvador needs to make some changes to the criminal justice system. Maybe the presumption of innocence thing isn't very strong there, or maybe there's not an appeals process, or like there's all these different things that like might be able to correct for that. It doesn't prove that like all abortions should be legal.
Yeah. So like one of the things that they talk about is like they'll say in the different subtitles and things, when abortion is considered aggravated homicide, women can be jailed for miscarriage. What we'll see a little bit later is these women didn't really have what we think of as the spontaneous miscarriage in like the early pregnancy. Women who were having accusations of abortion didn't end up going to jail. I just want to kind of go into that a little bit. I think that's important to address. The women you'll see in the video have been charged and prosecuted as having aggravated homicide. Okay, so we had there was like a study done, and this was from around 2000 to 2011. And there were 120 women who were prosecuted, and 68 were prosecuted for consensual and self-induced abortion, and 60 for aggravated homicide. Okay, so
those are like two different laws that you can be charged with, and they obviously mean different things. So what's the difference?
So like in general, the women prosecuted for homicide were initially charged with abortion, but then their charges were changed later. So they were changed to aggravated homicide because there were no indications of having an abortion taken place. And usually the fetus was 6 to 7 months gestation
Wow.
And what's happening is they're having a premature birth, but they're not, there's like a rupture of the placenta. There's a problem with the pregnancy, but they're not going to the hospital. So they're having this premature birth outside of the hospital, outside of medical care. The fetus dies. And then they're later charged with aggravated homicide for not like going to the hospital to try to like save the baby. So that's a real issue because we don't want to conflate the situation of like you're accused of self-induced abortion and you have had some sort of situation where you've lost your baby. The baby died because you didn't go to the hospital and get help.
So this is obviously like very important details for the case, but like I'm still a little bit confused. So these women went into kind of a spontaneous premature delivery. Like they didn't try to make that happen with like drugs or something like that. Like it just happened. They would have wanted to go through the normal 40-ish weeks of pregnancy. They didn't. They go into delivery at 7 months, not at the hospital. They don't go to the hospital, and the baby dies quickly because of just, it's a lot more complicated, helping a baby at 7 months survive a premature delivery. And then they still didn't go to the hospital for like financial reasons, or like what, like did the baby die? Like the baby would have survived if they had immediately gone to the hospital after like a quick delivery, or is it like the baby died really quickly and then it's just like this didn't feel like there was much of a point to going to the hospital or something?
So there's a lot of complications. And I think what is tricky here is every case is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is, so there's in El Salvador, private hospitals and public hospitals.
Okay.
These women can't afford to go to the private hospitals. And in the public hospitals, if they suspect that there might be a self-induced abortion, they're told to report it. And so according to like this research, it's kind of a luck of the draw. Are you going to get a sympathetic doctor, or are you going to get like a more maybe pro-life doctor, or a doctor who's going to stick to the regulations and is going to report something like this? And so there was like different people that were convicted, right, of these 129 women. The 49 that were convicted, 23 of them were for abortion. So it's like actual self-induced evidence against them. Of all of those women, only one went to jail and served time. The rest got out on parole. The ones who were the varying degrees of homicide, and this is like in the later stages, 26 of them went to jail and are like serving prison sentences. So it's unsure of like what's kind of going on. Were these later term like abortion attempts, or did things go wrong and they didn't go and get prenatal care because they were afraid they were going to be prosecuted and then got prosecuted anyway? Right. So we're not sure.
Yeah.
But one of the things, and so this is all from like a very Center for Reproductive Rights, like pro-choice PDF that I'm like doing this reading from. And in that PDF, they talk about how sometimes medical experts were called in as like witnesses and stuff. And then the things that they said like in the court were kind of just dismissed. So it seems like some of these women were actually wrongfully prosecuted. For example, one of them, they said like an autopsy report showed that the fetus probably died in utero from like lack of oxygen. That's something that is not under control, right? But it's not under the woman's control.
Right.
And so she's being convicted after that. That seems really, really wrong.
Right.
So there's a lot going on here with individual cases, but I just wanted to make sure we're understanding in the video. It seems like they're talking about abortion, and then they're talking about this other thing like, oh, abortion's been turned into aggravated homicide, but they're actually separate things. Does that all make sense?
That makes sense. But it makes me want to ask this clarification question. So you've looked into this more than I have. It sounds like there's some serious equivocation happening in this video. Do you have good reason to believe that this is intentional equivocation on the level of like propaganda, or do you think this is possibly an honest mistake?
So that's complicated. So I don't think it's like an honest mistake where the people who are making the video are misunderstanding what's going on in these cases. But I think their concern is when you try to prosecute abortion, here's what has happened in El Salvador. And then the hidden part is here's what will happen anywhere. And so like they know that there's a difference between they're first brought in as an accusation of abortion, and then later as there's like investigation into the case, they change it to this different charge. And so that's happening throughout these cases. They don't make that clear in the video, which I think is manipulative.
So given that, and we'll get to that, like I'm feeling frustrated because like this is...
I hate 2018.
Well, I mean... there's some things about 2018 that I really do hate.
Right.
And this is now on that list because I really dislike this kind of dishonesty.
Yeah.
And like the structure of the argument then seems to be, well, El Salvador has a really bad criminal justice system where they just end up improperly sentencing people and ignoring facts of the case. Well, here's the thing that they did in El Salvador. Therefore, it's going to be bad everywhere. Mm-hmm. And not to say that the criminal justice system in our country is perfect or even very good. I think it's neither, personally. Right. You don't have to agree with that. The point is, the fact that it's this bad in El Salvador doesn't mean it has to be this bad everywhere else. If it was happening this badly in a country that was more comparable to the criminal justice system's justice level in America, then it would make for a stronger argument. Like, you could similarly, like, you could have some, like, you could imagine there's some kind of a crazy country that's like very set apart from everywhere else, and they're just like living in the wild, wild west, and they happen to illegalize abortion. And because they're living in the wild, wild west, everything is bananas and crazy there, and a lot of innocent people end up getting hurt. Well, therefore, America can't illegalize abortion. Like, give me a break. What a terrible argument. And apart from that, what terrible philosophy of law to say that because a law can be badly enforced, that makes the law inevitably badly enforced. We could do the same thing with infanticide. What if they illegalized infanticide in El Salvador or anywhere else, and some innocent mothers whose children died of natural causes were then put in prison? Does that mean we shouldn't illegalize infanticide? No, it means, duh, what a bad criminal justice system. Right. Like the clear rule of law should be presumption of innocence. And so if a child dies, a born child dies, should you look into it? Sure. If you don't have really good evidence that the mother killed him, or in a case of born child, or the father killed him, you don't prosecute the parents. Mm-hmm. Like, that is a proper, just way to do this law. Right. And so this whole approach is just like illogical and garbage on multiple levels. You've got this bad country situation. You also have this horrendous philosophy of law situation. And the critical piece here is that the bad enforcement of this law is not inherent to the law.
Yeah.
So there's a different dynamic going on. I'm sorry, go for a little while here. There's a different dynamic going on with socialism. So some of the arguments against socialism, it's going to vary from country to country. But the argument that capitalists make against socialism is that these other countries, the problems they're having are essential to the nature of what socialism is.
Right.
And you can disagree with that or not, but like, that's the nature of the argument, is that it's essential to what socialism is. Mm-hmm. And so what this video needs to argue is that it's essential to arguments against abortion to get this wrong. And that's obviously not true.
Yeah. This is like, I've got an outline of points in front of me that I want to make on this podcast, but I'm telling you, like, this, what Tim just said, is one of the most important things you can get out of the episode. Like if you don't understand what Tim said in the last 3 minutes, that's the part you need to rewind and just get that. Like, trotting out the infanticide thing, I think, is a really, really important thing to be able to do if you want to be able to respond to people that are using this video or arguments like what is made in this video. That is a critical point. And of course, it is comparing apples and hand grenades to be like, here's what goes on in this third world country. And so here's what's definitely going to happen in every first world country. He does like there's just huge differences. And it doesn't make the third world country issues like fine. It's like, hey, this is just like, we wouldn't do it that way in America. So it's fine if that's how, like, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, all of them should get better. America, El Salvador, all the criminal justice systems should get better. It doesn't mean that we're going to do things all exactly the same way. Of course, oh my gosh.
At this point, I don't know what to believe because this video is demonstrably dishonest. So I'll just say this. If there actually are any women in that prison who have been imprisoned for miscarriage, I want them out. Right. This is horrible. Right. This is incredibly unjust. But at this point, I don't even know what to believe. But if that's the case, like, I'm marching alongside the pro-choice advocates. Like, absolutely, they should be out of prison. You shouldn't be in prison for miscarriage. That's ridiculous. But I also, like, at this point, I don't know what to believe anymore because this video is one of the most dishonest pieces of propaganda I think I've seen.
Yeah. And that's really important. So going back to something that Rachel said, though, that I thought was important. So you've got these categories. This is so confusing. So you got this category of people who might have had abortions, let's say in the first 2 trimesters. and they were being charged against, some anti-abortion law. And only one of those people ended up going to jail. Was that one person who did go to jail as a result of that anti-abortion law? Was that person in the video, by the way?
No. So that person's not in the video as far as I can tell. So only one woman served a prison sentence after being charged with an abortion crime. All the women in the video who are serving sentences are charged with aggravated homicide. Now, that doesn't mean that they necessarily committed a crime.
Right.
They could falsely be imprisoned for like a late miscarriage or something, but it's not an abortion crime, which they don't distinguish and is really dishonest.
So I'll just say, for the record, in at least one of the cases where someone could get charged under that aggravated homicide law, or was that what it was called? Yeah. If the situation for a particular person is they suddenly go into preterm delivery and they give birth to a living baby that would survive if they went to the hospital, and chose not to go to the hospital just because they're concerned that maybe they're going to be like falsely accused of something, and that's why the baby dies, like, I'm okay with there being some kind of a charge against that person. What that person, like what the like consequences should be is a bigger debate for me. And I understand, and I have some sympathy for if there's a situation where people are actually often being falsely imprisoned for things, and like that's your situation. I have a lot of sympathy for that person, and I would say move. I mean, like I know like there are people that like it's really, really hard for them to be able to move. So I'm not trying to like make light of the situation, but it's like anything just about is going to be better than just like watching a child die that didn't have to die because they're concerned of what might happen because of unjust doctors in the future. In the worst case scenario, you get falsely accused, you get sent to prison, and hopefully that will be one of the cases that turns the entire crazy thing around, like of people being falsely imprisoned. Like, anyway, so like I do see like there's a huge kind of spectrum here of things that can be going on, even just with these, aggravated homicide laws. I don't think that they're all necessarily unjust. But they don't talk about that all in the video, and that's like really frustrating. Like, again, I think it is super unjust anytime someone goes to jail, like falsely, like where they shouldn't be going to jail. Like, I mean, that's almost like, like I'm just saying, a circle's a circle. Like, of course, like it's like by definition, it's like that's really, really wrong. But it's also really, really important to help your children survive situations where you're not able to give them medical care. And so let's say one of my sons, let's say William. So William is my second son. Is my middle. He's the middle kid of the three boys, and he is, of all three, the one, like, if we could afford gymnastics and things like that, like he's the one who ought to be having it, because he's basically already doing that. Like, he's now seen one karate movie, and now he's like, now he's really into like parkour. And I'm like a little bit freaked out that he's into parkour now, because I'm like, what might happen?
I wasn't sure what you meant. I was like that could have meant because he's got a lot of talent, or it could be like he's so uncoordinated he needs help.
No, like
that could have gone different directions.
He's passionate about getting out all of his physical energy, which seems to be a relatively infinite like supply, and he's just like doing all kinds of weird flips and things on couches and trying to like run sideways on them around like like he's doing like all kinds of things where
Michael Scott and Dwight parkour,
but a lot better. Like, to the point like my wife took gymnastics when she was young, and she was like really good at it, and like we can both see like he has some natural talent that is not fully being used. But anyway, so he's that kid who does a lot of things that I'm like, that's dangerous. And we have to be kind of like, there are some things, it's okay for kids to get like, for boys to do boy things and sometimes get a bit hurt, and it's like going to be fine. Like, I don't want them to like fall from the top of the tree, but if he falls from like a 6-foot high branch or something, like he'll be okay. It's going to be fine. Like, it's that kind of thing. So if William,
terrible father,
right?
Sorry.
So if William has like just this, not very, and to be, I'll also be clear, like this is like a weird thought experiment, because weirdly, he's the most safety conscious kid of all three of them. So like, he's the one doing the most dangerous stuff, and is probably also the least likely to get hurt, ever. Is like this is a good thing. So let's say he has this moment where he's not trying to be safe, and he climbs too high on like maybe he decides he's going to try to do like a thing off of like our second floor, and he's going to like try to land and do a cool roll on the sofa because he saw a behind the scenes scene of some stuntman doing that. And he decides to go for it, and it doesn't work out, and he gets really hurt. He's not dead, but he's really, really hurt.
He's like potentially dying.
Yes.
Okay.
Like let's say we have the epistemological knowledge of knowing that he is dying, but we also have the knowledge that we are in a state where this is a thought experiment. I'm not saying this is what's going on in North Carolina, but let's say North Carolina is this really like hyper CPS is always taking kids away from families and putting people in jail for any time there's any suspicion of child abuse. And so we know that there is a high likelihood that if we take William to the ER for him to hopefully, we're going to try to stop the internal brain bleeding or whatever is going on with him, that I might end up in jail as like this negligent parent, or maybe it looks like child abuse. Maybe it looks like I hit the kid a couple of times or something.
Or throw him off the balcony.
Or something like that. Yeah. So like there's this reason for like, it is up in the, like, I know even like realistically speaking, if this actually happens, like North Carolina not being as far as I know, a crazy CPS state, like certainly there is going to be at least a conversation with someone. Like that's going to happen. They have people on staff at the hospital to pull the parents aside and be like, let's talk about what's going on. And the thing, like all that just happens. And I think that's fine. Scary as that would be, that's fine. If we decide not to take William to the hospital because we don't want to deal with the chance, even a high chance that I might end up going to jail like unjustly because of this horrible thing. If that's the only way to save William, I think I am still morally obligated to take William to the hospital and let the chips fall where they fall. Of course, I'm going to fight as much as I can for justice and all of those things. So what's driving me is something about the obligations that I think that we have to kids and helping people to that we are, especially people that we are responsible for, not die when they don't have to die, even if we're in a country or a state with an unjust criminal justice system. I mean, sometimes like those people might go to jail or have some kind of other bad consequence as a result. I'm open to being wrong on that. That's like where I'm at right now.
Yeah. And I think that's all really well said, because there's kind of a two-part thing going on here. You have a responsibility as a parent to try to save your child's life and get them medical help when needed. And then you also have CPS. They need to do their job.
Right.
They should be investigating more. And I think a lot of times with domestic abuse situations, they sometimes take people's word for it when, it's a wife, she's in a battered situation. And so I tripped and I fell. Like that happens way too much.
Sure.
And so I want to see CPS do their job. And I also want to see parents do their job. And what's going on in El Salvador, I think is, and this is something the pro-choice advocates are really worried about, with the illegal abortion law in place. There's like this monitoring of women going on where family members and people in the community are like reporting women for, I think, accusations of abortion. More often than that, there's the hospital medical professional reporting. So you can they actually broke down with like pie charts and everything, like how often a family member versus medical professional. And by a large margin, it's always medical professionals reporting this. And so there is this fear of women going to the hospital to save their baby. And so if we can remove that barrier, I think it would solve a lot of the problems and have that right to due process. The right to due process is in place as it should be. We're going to see fewer innocent people going to jail.
So help me understand, I'm tracking with what you're saying here, and this is helpful. My instinct is something like medical professionals being able to report, I think there might have been a homicide here as opposed to a natural death. Like that seems reasonable. And so can you be more specific about the change in improving due process or whatever it is that you would like to see happen in El Salvador that would be just and would result in a lot fewer people going to jail?
Yeah. So, right now we're seeing in the statistics, a lot of these cases are being dismissed because there's not enough evidence.
Right.
The women who are in prison right now, they were originally seen, there is enough evidence to prosecute. But then outside organizations like the Center for Reproductive Rights are coming in and trying to do appeals processes for these women. And so I think one of the things, if you step back from the right to due process system and you look at the other issues that are going on, El Salvador, they have one of the highest rates of illiteracy. People are illiterate. They don't really know what's going on with the laws. They don't trust medical professionals because there's a lot of things going on with kind of that. Like when you go to the hospital in America, you're trusting your doctor to give you good advice.
Right.
I think there's not that same trust going on, and it's like a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And this is something we talked a lot about in my women's studies classes, is like mistrusting doctors in situations where there's something like this of kind of the policing of women or something.
Right.
And so I think that fear is in some ways well-founded here, but also certainly over-exaggerated at a rhetorical push.
Yeah.
And having access to good public defenders could be another thing. But we saw like acquittals and conviction rates in these cases were actually similar for public and private defenders. So I don't know what to make of that. Something's going on here that's not good. I don't have the solution to it.
I don't understand what's going on there either. So I hear like the argument, like it's obviously not good for people to not trust their doctors. Like this is one of the pragmatic arguments against euthanasia is like, it's good for there to be this thing where, and this is where the, what is it called? This is where the Hippocratic Oath came from. Like this was like part of Hippocrates' like intention was at the time you had this thing where doctors had dual roles. They would sometimes help people. Sometimes they also killed people. And what was going on a lot of times at the time was, this is not funny, but it's like, oh my gosh, is like someone who like doesn't like, person B hates person A. It's like they're enemies. And person B goes to that guy's doctor and pays him to poison person A, at their next like visit kind of a thing. And so like, then like no one trusts doctors because sometimes like there's this epidemic of doctors sometimes killing people. So Hippocrates makes this oath that includes, basically do no harm. That said there needs to be a separation where doctors are never involved in anything like euthanasia or poison or like anything like that. There needs to be complete separation so you can always trust doctors. And so like, I get like there's this kind of idea here where like it's not, if doctors play this kind of dual role, if you will, where they're trying to help people who have medical problems, but also they're in this kind of reporting position that kind of naturally leads to people who either actually did do something wrong or maybe are concerned that they're going to, that it looks like they did something wrong, aren't going to want to go to their doctor. So I get that. So is the solution like there's got to be some different kind of a person who at least has access to knowing what's going on in the hospital that can, if a certain kind of paperwork maybe trigger some kind of investigation or something like that? Or is it something like we just don't investigate people who go to hospitals so that everyone totally trusts the entire like system at the hospital? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. Because this is really complicated. I mean, in your thought experiment with William, he's patient. He's not in any situation going to be the like offender, right? Or like when we have like reports of child abuse or anything like that in America, the patient's never like possibly up for prosecution.
Yeah.
But in this situation with women, it's very unique because the woman is patient, the fetus is patient, but the woman is possible offender. So I don't know how to juggle that kind of catch-22 we're dealing with.
Yeah, I don't know the solution either. It seems like if we say that hospitals, like there can't be any investigations of anything, like anyone, once you go into a hospital, you're entering this sovereign zone of like innocence. Like no one can get prosecuted once you get to a doctor. Like, it's like, you just got to get, it's like capture the flag. You just got to get to, past this line and it's going to be fine. Like that feels like going too far on the spectrum of like making sure people can trust doctors. Cause it just seems like this really, really easy to kill babies and get away with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Or abuse your wife or abuse anybody else.
Right.
Like this seems like too far on that side of the line to me too.
And I mean, we had something, I don't know about North Carolina's laws. I think it's state by state, but in Michigan, we have a thing for underage drinking where if you go to the hospital and you need your stomach pumped or whatever else for like alcohol poisoning and you're underage, you will not get prosecuted at all for like the minor in possession. And so like that was a very well-known thing. It was spread throughout. And I actually think that's a really good law. And also if you call 911 for your friend, so you're drunk, you call 911 for your friend, you're not going to get prosecuted. We can't do that with illegal abortion if we're going to actually be prosecuting women, because we can't have that like insurance policy of if you come to the hospital for a miscarriage, you won't be suspected at all. Because I feel like unless you're only, abortion's illegal, but we're only going after providers, which we talked about in our previous episode of like, that's what we actually think should happen as first priority. But eventually down the road, should women just get a complete free pass? I don't know how to juggle this.
Yeah.
So I agree with the Michigan law. I think that's a great law in the case of, but if you were to change that law to, okay, we do the exact same principle for any time a woman's been beaten, including like possibly by her husband. I mean, the husband can just walk in and be like, yeah, I beat her. Here's exactly where I hit her. And so just make sure you take care of all of these areas and make sure there's no breaks in here.
Right.
And he just gets off scot-free. That's a bad law.
Exactly.
Like really clearly a bad law. Something like alcohol poisoning, I think that's a good law. I can imagine a pushback to that because I don't want to like be like, hey, underage drinking, there's nothing wrong there. But that seems like a good law to me. But when it comes to you're hurting somebody else, you're killing somebody else, it's a rape victim. You say, hey, as long as the rapist takes the woman to the hospital, then she can get taken care of afterwards, he's fine. Like that's clearly not okay.
Yeah.
And so I think given that if abortion is killing a human being, I don't think we can apply that same kind of standard here.
I agree with you.
But again, we need to have a very high burden of proof because the value of not prosecuting an innocent person is significantly higher than the value of not letting a guilty person get away. Yeah. So it's not she's just complete immunity to everyone, but still keep the way that the criminal justice system has to work is high burden of proof on the prosecution. Right. I think that does still work.
And some of our listeners might just like disagree with you on that principle. Like I remember like I've always felt like that principle was fairly obvious, but I know like I remember listening to Andrew Breitbart's audiobook. I think this was even before he died, but I don't remember the name of the book, but he's like going through his like general conservative positions on different like things. And I remember him saying like, there's some things that conservatives say that just like are totally goofy to me. I'm totally paraphrasing. It's been like 4 years since I listened to the audiobook, but this, I know this is in there. He talks about like, some people talk about how it's like better to, let 1,000 criminals go free to prevent one innocent person going to jail. Like there's some phrases like that he was pointing at. And it was like, of course that's not true. The math doesn't work out. It would definitely be better to be able to put 1,000 criminals in jail, even if that means putting one innocent person in jail. His thing was like he was pushing back against the principle. He's like, I just disagree. I think it's not as bad.
1,000 to 1, maybe. Like there's a line somewhere.
Sure. But so it might be that like different people can disagree with us like on different like principles. Sure. Maybe that's a principle where you disagree, where it's like, no, like having justice like happen every single time injustice, like, as a result of injustice is like this. So like how we balance, evidence and burden of proof and all these different things,
there's room for reasonable disagreement.
Yes.
But the point is it's clearly okay to not just give people a free pass with something like abortion, something like child abuse, something like rape. We don't do that, even though in all of those cases, that could mean someone doesn't go to the hospital or someone does go to prison when they shouldn't. We have to have a line somewhere. And the most just way to respond to all of those problems at once is to say, okay, we do prosecute sometimes. We have a high burden of proof for it.
So the video is implying this thing of these laws will like always naturally lead to these problems of innocent people going to jail. But notice another way like that the video doesn't prove it. Like the video doesn't give very much information. The testimonies, for example, like there's these vague things said, something happened to me is an actual like piece of evidence that is dropped. And I'm like, what happened to you? Like, did you have a spontaneous miscarriage? You miscarried after taking RU46, or it's kind of an intentional miscarriage? You had an abortion? Like what happened? Like saying something happened to me doesn't prove that you're innocent.
Completely unclear video.
So like anytime something like this happens, I want a lot of information about the alleged victim story. And I think like, especially on this issue, or at least like this issue, and there may be others where like certain sides should definitely be not like automatically given like benefit of the doubt. I think pro-choice advocates are in that category of people that have been known to be dishonest about stuff like this and do equivocation on stuff like this in the past. So take Purvi Patel. Purvi Patel, we have one article on the blog about her situation because I wrote about how there's this interesting thing where there was a pro-choice person on Reddit who had exposed like there was this major media bias about the way that the Purvi Patel story was being told. Purvi Patel being this person who actually went to jail under a feticide law. Like she purposely had a chemical self-abortion, threw the baby in the dumpster, and she ended up getting charged under that state's feticide law, and she went to jail. Now, she is not in jail anymore. That thing got overturned. This is after I posted my article about that interesting pro-choice Redditor kind of exchange. There's a lot more information about her in that article, but a judge later threw it out. But he threw it out because after they appealed, the judge said, I'm changing your jail sentence to less than time served. So she gets to like literally walk out of the courthouse after the session. Why? Because I don't think that this state's feticide law was ever intended to prosecute people for self-abortions. This feticide law is meant to prosecute, people who kill other people's babies. And so because it was never meant to be a thing against self-abortions, you get to go. He never said, oh, we've got new evidence. We no longer think we've got enough evidence to say that you actually attempted to kill your own baby. No. He just said this was like not the reason that we have the feticide law. So we don't currently have a law on our books against what you specifically did. And we totally know that she did it. And just to remind you of the evidence against her, and this is like, it's in the article, we know she did it. See, 3 days before she was hospitalized, she texts her friend, these pills taste like bleep, and that if these don't work after tasting so nasty, I'm going to be mad. June 10th, she texts her friend again about ordering abortion pills from an quote unquote international pharmacy. And then her friend asks her, begs her 3 times, just see a doctor. Patel says, I'd rather not even go to a doc. I just want to get this over with. And then on 3 days later, she texts her friend, just lost the baby. I'm going to clean up the bathroom and then go to Moe's, which is the restaurant that her parents owned. And that dumpster outside that Moe's is where they found the dead baby.
That's horrible.
We know she did it. And the only reason she's not in jail, where I honestly think that's where she ought to be, is she threw this baby, who we think there's decent evidence that the baby was alive at birth. That one is a little bit harder to tell on the autopsy, but there's at least evidence that the baby was alive at birth. She went to jail, and she's only out because the judge said that law wasn't meant to be used against people who chemically kill their babies, cause, preterm deliveries, and then throw them in dumpsters. This is a different thing. So we don't have laws against that.
So the judge version of jury nullification. It's
exactly.
Judge nullification.
That's judge nullification. But here's the thing. Pro-choice people called Purvi Patel an innocent victim. They called what happened to her a miscarriage. So in a video like this, with phrases like innocent victims and miscarriages are being thrown around by pro-choice advocates. It's the Center for Reproductive Rights is behind a lot of stuff, the information that was used in the video. I don't buy it. Maybe what they mean by miscarriage is what I mean by miscarriage, and what I think reasonable people would mean by miscarriage versus abortion, which are very, very different things. But sometimes they mean exactly what Purvi Patel did, where she intentionally killed her baby, including leaving it in a dumpster, and pro-choice advocates were livid that she might get prosecuted and punished for that.
And they called it miscarriage.
And let me quote one of the video's lines, and I want to kind of go off of that, Josh, because I think it's a really good point. So they say, today, at least 38 women say they have been wrongfully convicted of intentionally ending their pregnancies.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Here's the thing. Does that mean that they didn't intentionally end their pregnancy and it was a spontaneous miscarriage? Or does that mean that they're wrongfully convicted for doing so? Does that make sense? It's a double standard. And so there's a big difference here, because either you're wrongfully convicted because you have a right to abortion and there's nothing wrong with killing your fetus like this woman did, or they're wrongfully convicted because they're innocent of doing that act, which is illegal. Those are two separate things. And the way that they're using lines like this, it's super deceptive, and people don't even realize they're being misled. Right.
It's like if the William thing happened and later I've got a headline because they've done run a story on me and I'm indignantly saying I got accused of child abuse. It's like, well, that could mean a couple different things. That could just mean I'm stating the fact that the law, the charge against me is child abuse, and maybe I actually did. I'm just saying, yeah, that's the name of the law they charged me against. Or it could be that what's implied here is that I did not abuse my kid and I'm being accused of child abuse, and that's really awful. And it is not clear
it's a wrongful, what's going on. It's a wrongful conviction, quote unquote, whether you were convicted of a crime that you didn't commit, or if the crime itself being in law is a bad law.
Right.
Either way, you could call it a wrongful.
There are laws apparently use as opposed to the word abortion, intentionally ending their pregnancy, which is fine. Okay. That's what they call it. Is this something that they actually meant to do or not?
I want to point out to another piece in the video where I feel like they're being misleading intentionally. So they have this not undercover, but He's like hidden, one of those like the doctor's hidden. One of those times where you can like.
That was not a well hidden doctor. Like, I could pull him out of a lineup with how well lit he was. And this bald head. This is not well done,
and
guys.
They're like calling him like Dr. Hell. I thought that was really awkward.
That was a strange choice. It was
super strange.
Anyway,
all of that aside. So he's talking about, as a doctor, how he feels like he should provide abortions, even though they're illegal, and he's risking jail time. He's risking losing his medical license. One of the things he says is that about 50% of his patients underwent sexual violence.
Yeah, 50%?
Here's the thing. If that's true, I'm not saying that it's not true. Like that, there's a huge possibility that's true. And if it is, how horrible.
Right.
Like, and sexual violence is really, really common in this area for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of like gang activity. That's horrible. I'm condemning that 100%, of course.
Yeah.
But in the context of what he's talking about providing abortion procedures. And so I think people listening to this are linking in their minds that 50% of the patients seeking abortion are seeking an abortion that is a result of a rape. And that is not the same thing, right? So like if someone goes to the doctor for an abortion, they could have a history of sexual violence, but this abortion is from a consensual sexual relationship.
Right.
And so I think that they're really pushing here the like rape and incest card, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Obviously it is like everyone agrees rape is horrible, horrible, horrible. He goes into like detail, or not like a lot of detail, but he tells a story about an actual gang rape. Of course, that is awful. But what he does was he launches from that to say, and I wrote it down, he said, quote, "Women have the right to decide their reproductive needs." That's just begging the question. Like, I generally think that women should have the right, or people in general should have the right to choose their reproductive needs, but not if that entails killing people. But he doesn't draw that out. Mm-hmm. It's just hidden premise and use of really powerful emotional rhetoric to hopefully, slip that in and make it so that you can't tell the illusion that just happened in front of your eyes.
Appealing to reproductive needs is a bad reason to argue for killing an infant. And you can. You have an already born person that already exists that you have reproduced. If your reproductive needs are different than that, you can kill the infant. There's no reason why we should apply different logic to the embryo. The embryo already exists. It's an already existing person. You killing it and masking that as part of your reproductive needs is ridiculous.
Yeah. And by the way, this doctor who, like, as they're introducing him, talk about how he has set up this secret network of doctors doing illegal abortions. I don't have sympathy for him. Like, he's all mad. I was like, we are risking going to jail. I've got no sympathy for this guy. He's knowingly breaking the law. Mm-hmm.
To kill babies. And he's seeing the babies. He's killing, personally shredding the babies. He deserves to go to jail.
Yeah. So there's a better point that he made, or not, I mean, by better, I mean something like really specific, like a more persuasive thing he said, where it's easier to find some common ground. Like he said, like, laws like this mean that women are at risk of self-induced abortion injuries. I think that's true. Like, that makes sense that you are less likely to go to your doctor for an abortion if you expect that there's like a reasonable chance that you might get caught if you do this. I feel a lot of sympathy for people who are in difficult situations, or they're pregnant from rape, or like all these different things. I've got sympathy for them, but I'm sorry, like, people should not do dangerous things in order to kill their child. There's a point that happens sometimes when pro-choice people talk about the self-induced abortion thing, where they go so far as to making arguments I think that are implicitly actually like demeaning of women, like taking all autonomy from women as if like they're never actually making choices at all, which is like, women are not stupid. Like, people do stupid things sometimes, or dangerous things sometimes, like, and all that. But sometimes, like, we go so far as to be like, they're just like forced into doing these things. Like, it's like women are smarter than that. Women have more free will than that. Like, there's like, just don't like this thing where like, so because we have these laws, then people are definitely going to do a lot of really dangerous things that are going to result in a lot of them being dead. No, there is a better choice as far as preventing yourself from having a huge, like, life-threatening medical injury problem, as well as, of course, naturally, a morally better choice of not killing your child. Instead of making it legal to kill children to avoid people hurting themselves or even being tempted to hurt themselves, I think we should do our best to educate people about the dangers of illegal abortion. If somehow people don't know that giving yourself drugs or doing, something analogous to like the whole coat hanger thing on yourself. If people actually don't know that's dangerous, okay, I really want them to know that's dangerous. I really want them to know that abortion is wrong. I don't want them to just know, here's this thing that you shouldn't do anymore pragmatically because it's dangerous. No, like there's a reason why abortion is wrong. So here's why. I want them to know about alternatives to abortion. If the adoption system needs to get improved to make it so more people are choosing adoption when they ought to, all things considered, then of course I want that. Like there's all these things. I'm just saying like this doesn't prove that. Like it makes it so, of course, we should not have laws against abortion. Like ultimately, we can't always prevent people from doing dangerous things.
Sure. It seems like you're kind of articulating the thing that Steve Wagner said a number of times, which is that like the dangerous illegal abortion argument seems to presuppose the idea that, well, the abortion is going to happen. Like there's one of two options.
Right.
Either she's going to get an abortion legally or she's going to get an abortion illegally. That doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think it's also important that like we don't allow people to hold the law hostage in any other circumstance. Like no one is allowed to hold a gun to their own head and say, change the law or I shoot myself. Doesn't matter how many people are doing that. If we go to the alternative world of Fantasia, which Rachel recently wrote about in one of her blog posts, this is a world where abortion can't exist because human development is such that women's bodies are much better at protecting embryos than they are in this world. So in that world, there's no abortion. Let's say we've got a lot of women that are seriously desperate. They want to kill their babies, even in a dangerous way if necessary. And so we have a law against infanticide. They say, well, either change this law or we kill ourselves. Do we then change the law? It's a horrible situation. It's horrible that they're that desperate, but we don't make horrible things legal because people are trying to hold the law hostage. We just can't do that.
Instead of arguing about the morality of abortion, it's totally moved to they're going to happen anyway. Give us what we want or women will die.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. And crimes happen anyway, even when the crime is a crime.
Right.
But we don't make that argument with anything else. And we don't want to see women die from illegal abortion, but we can't compromise on something that's so obviously wrong.
Right.
And it's also true that this whole line of argument means no laws on abortion at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's no getting around it. You could have a woman in the third trimester. She's days before her due date. Now she wants an abortion. You say she can't have an abortion? Well, I'm so desperate. Maybe I'll do it myself and I'll hurt myself doing it. We don't want that to happen. That's tragic. But that means if you're going to follow that line of argument, and that's why you're going to justify keeping abortion legal, that means you keep all abortion legal.
Yep.
Yes.
This is really important. So like if you haven't read, we've probably linked to it like every third podcast or something, but if you haven't read The Bodily Rights Arguments Necessitate Extremism Peace, like you need to read it because not only is it like a really important point, but I've found it, as far as in my experience, to be so persuasive to pro-choice people. Sometimes they abandon bodily rights arguments altogether because they're like, oh, that whole category of arguments are doomed. So I'm just going to jump to it's not a person or whatever is their thing. Like there's a very similar argument going on here with the illegal abortion thing that I think is very undervalued in the pro-life movement right now.
Yeah, I didn't make that point in the bodily rights arguments necessitate extremism piece, but I think I made it in another piece. I think the turning the tables one. It's the same logic.
Yep.
It's the type of argument that does not allow for exceptions, but it's made by people that aren't being clear about that.
And so one of the reasons I think that this video is being circulated at this time, it's very opportune because of the kind of political climate around abortion in a global context. You look at what happened in Ireland, and it sure felt like if you were on Twitter in the last year, it felt like that was the only thing that was going on in the world. Everyone on Twitter, like especially pro-life Twitter, they were obsessed about the Ireland referendum, right? And saving the eighth. And ultimately we lost that battle. It did get repealed. And now Ireland's abortion laws have changed dramatically. But they were like one of the last developed countries to have abortion outlawed. And so now all these other countries, which still have really strict abortion laws, are taking the momentum of what happened in Ireland and they're pushing for it in their own country. So El Salvador is the one in the video. Just to give you kind of, I'm gonna go through a little bit of overview of different countries and things that are happening and kind of what their current laws are. So Nicaragua, Malta, and the Dominican Republic all have complete abortion bans still, along with El Salvador. Then a lot of like the Latin American countries, they have pretty strict abortion laws. Some of them have like rape exceptions, or they'll have like anencephaly exceptions. Argentina's one that has really been in the news lately because their lower house of Congress recently approved a bill for removing the abortion ban up to 14 weeks. So what it's looking like is it's unlikely to actually go through in the Senate and everything because they have a much more conservative Senate. So the bill's not going to actually be passed. But those who are the pro-choice advocates are counting this as like a really huge win. Yeah, this is the first time they've seen something like this in recent years.
It seems like there's some momentum going there. So like there's a picture that blew up on Reddit recently where like it's like a drone picture from like really high. I'll probably just like make this the main image of the podcast. But it's just like there's the Capitol in the middle, and then there's like a road on the top side going horizontally, and then there's a parallel road on the other side of the Capitol. And so they had a pro-choice kind of march thing going on the top, and then they had a pro-life one on the bottom. And people were really excited because there was a lot more people on the pro-choice side than on the pro-life side. And so I think there's definitely this thing going on where pro-choice people feel like there's this momentum happening, even if it doesn't pass the Senate. Like the fact that it passed the House was like this really big deal. And there's more and more people in South America that are becoming pro-abortion choice, and eventually maybe these bans will all go.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really interesting about Argentina, for those who don't know, is like protests and like public marches are like really common there. They're not an apathetic country, which is super interesting to me. And some of these protests that have been happening from feminist groups are shutting down streets and businesses for like days at a time because they'll have multiple marches. Yeah. Here's where they're getting all the momentum. There's this like gender-based, like against gender violence movement happening in Argentina and other Latin American countries. And it's a feminist group, and they're called Ni Una Menos. And they're like marching against pretty much like a marital like abuse and physical abuse from like partners of any sort. And so they're working against that, which is a great thing.
Yeah, I'd be marching with them.
Exactly. And so they're getting a lot of momentum from that. But they're using the platform to, guess what, speak out against abortion. So, or speak in favor of, removing the ban. And so like one of the spokespersons for like this International Women's Health Coalition, she's saying, our position demands for safe, legal, and free abortion at the center of our movement. She says, patriarchy penetrates and is persuasive throughout the Argentine society. There's a link between violence against women and the denial of safe, legal abortion services. So if that doesn't tell you that they have an alternative agenda, I don't know what will. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to be mansplaining about the patriarchy.
But it's pretty intense. And one of the reasons for the, lack of abortion access in these countries is the Catholic Church. They're really primarily Catholic countries. And Pope Francis is from Argentina. So he actually commented on this back in March when all of this was kind of happening in the lower house of Congress, pretty much saying that the Catholic Church needs to remain clear, firm, and passionate. And so a lot of the legislators, there's been like a lot of controversy on, where they're voting and where they're standing because of faith-based things. Yeah. So I'm going to move on a little bit to Brazil. So abortion is illegal in Brazil, except for the woman's life at risk when she has been raped or when the fetus has anencephaly. And a lot of the people who are like protesting for abortion in these areas, they're carrying banners that are very much to do with like socioeconomic status. So they'll have something, the translation from Portuguese is something like rich women abort, but the poor die. And so again, we're seeing like this back alley abortion argument. And so another thing is all of these countries, they have really high illegal abortion rates, but everything's estimated. So like I was trying to find like what's the rate of legal abortion in Brazil. And I found a number, and I don't know how true this is. It's between 400,000 and 800,000 women. I'm like, that's a really big range. So I don't know what's all going on. And given the history in America of like what illegal abortion numbers were kind of made up to be, and like women dying from illegal abortions were made up to be before Roe v. Wade, I'm super skeptical when I'm coming across stuff like this.
Can I just interject something real quick? Just like, I mean, I know a lot of people understand this, but just like there's an alternative version of the back alley abortion argument going on there where it's like that there would be this unequal thing because right now, you know, if you're in a country where abortion is not legal, then a rich person can cross the border or maybe just has the access to the amount of funds they need to get a doctor to do the abortion there secretly, whereas poor women can't. And this is just not a good argument. Like it doesn't mean that everyone should be able to do this thing. And so just as a thought experiment, and try not to get triggered by this, because from The Last Jedi, the part of The Last Jedi that like everybody hated, basically like the really preachy animal abuse part, you know, the Las Vegas kind of planet, like all the rich, awful people. So these rich, awful people have this like animal abuse thing going on where these weird alien horse things are, you know, run races and they're being electrocuted and shocked by people. So they'll run faster. Like it's really bad and super preachy. Of course, animal abuse is wrong. Right. It's like, I get it. But like, there's this thing where it's like, no one would argue though, this like, all these rich people, all these rich aliens get to do this abusive horse racing thing. We should make it legal and available for everyone, so that all the poor people can abuse the alien horses too. And it would be like, no, we should just not be doing that thing. Like it's just a bad argument.
It's pretty crazy. And I think that the identity politics is just this poison that's spreading across the globe. And they're going to use whatever ammunition to, you know, fund their agenda that they can. And right now they're, you know, it's something that resonates with a lot of people. If you have a lot of poor people and you want them on their side, tell them like our people, us versus the rich, like us, we're dying and they're able to have like their safe illegal abortions. Like that's crazy talk, but I think they're trying whatever they can. They're really desperate. And so there's this like building momentum and we're constantly shifting. Last year, Chile passed a bill that allows abortion when a woman's life is at risk in the case of rape or when there's a severe fetal abnormality. And so that happened. I feel like nobody really talked about that. That was late last year. South Korea, interesting enough, they had like their first March for Life on June 16th. Wow. And that's an interesting case to me because there's a medical doctor who's been prosecuted for performing almost 70 abortions. And so he's using his position as a prosecuted medical provider to challenge the current ban.
Right now, it's illegal to have abortions in South Korea?
Yes, it is. So they're going to have like a public hearing. And so he's like challenging this, saying that their abortion restrictions are bad. And so they're going to be like in late July, probably releasing the ruling on that.
And the response to that from the pro-lifers has been to do something like a March for Life.
Yeah, they've been doing something like a March for Life, which is pretty interesting. I want to quote someone from he's a chairperson for that March for Life Career Organizing Committee. Mm-hmm. He says, even now, when it is illegal to perform an abortion, more than 500,000 fetuses are aborted every year in Korea. Mm. I don't know where people are getting these numbers. I'm really interested to hear from that.
Does that include North Korea?
I think it's only South Korea.
Okay.
When they say Korea, I think they mean South.
Okay.
So the only country I found which is not moving in that direction, it's coming back, is China, which is such a plot twist. But one of the provinces of China recently, they ruled that if you're going to have an abortion after 14 weeks, you have to get information. You have to get something signed by 3 different medical professionals saying that the abortion is medically necessary because the amount of repeat abortions in that area is so high. It's now putting women's health at risk, which is super scary. Yeah. But they're
wait a second. There are no medical risks for abortion. That's what the pro-choice community has always said.
I know. It's crazy.
So what's the problem?
Tim, don't get sassy with me here. No,
okay.
I can't. But anyway, I want to take all this information and kind of put it in I want to look at the abortion issue from a 3,000 feet view, because so many times the pro-life movement in America is focused on what's happening here. I want to look at what's happening globally. And I know David B. Wright has actually talked before about how, the rest of the world, they kind of watch to see what America does. Yeah. And if we ended abortion here in America, it would be like a domino effect. Right now, we're seeing the opposite, I think, from what happened in Ireland. And I want pro-life people, when they dialogue about what's going on in a global context, if people saw the video that we're talking about today in El Salvador, I don't want to see pro-life people take their arguments that they're using when they were debating about saving the eighth and apply it to these other countries that are, especially the third world countries, because situations are different. Like, we didn't see many women die from illegal abortion in Ireland. If a woman wanted to have an abortion, because of the way the economy is and because of the neighboring countries' abortion laws, they just went outside the country and then came back, which obviously is super inconvenient if you want to kill your baby and do that. But it's not the same as some of the like things we're seeing in, you know, El Salvador and Argentina with the gang violence and the low medical practices and the amount of illiteracy. Like, there's a lot that's playing a role there. And I think legal aid too. So I'd be interested in looking at Ireland over the last years and seeing how many women were prosecuted for abortion when it was illegal. I would guess not a lot. That's the one area I didn't do research. So if you want to do research on that, I think it'd be really interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Given that these countries are living with really strict abortion laws, and we want much stricter laws here in America, maybe not the same way being, certainly not executed the same way that they are. We don't want to see women being, you know, innocent people being put in jail. Why isn't this a persuasive argument overall? Like, looking at these bad things are happening here. Like, I kind of want that discussion to be on the table so that the pro-life people listening understand that the difference doesn't apply. It's not like a lead up for how we should be making policy here.
Yeah. I mean, like, for me, like, anytime I hear someone say, it's like sometimes like Poland gets brought up and it's just, or, you know, if El Salvador gets brought up or something, it's just like, okay, for us to have a reasonable, intelligent conversation where the facts matter, you know, like, I need to know a lot more information than just, you know, 2 sentences on, well, this country did X and then Y happened. Like, there's so much I don't know yet. And,
right.
and you need to like be able to, you know, actually connect the dots and say, America's analogous for these reasons and therefore this. So like, someone could say America has a really screwed up criminal justice system too, kind of like El Salvador. And so since El Salvador, this thing happened, if America does the same thing, then we're going to make the same mistakes because we both have messed up criminal justice systems. And I'm going to say, okay, that's an interesting argument. Are they actually the same? Like, I'm with you. America has got such a screwed up criminal justice system on so many multiple levels that feel like they're not even like solvable in the sense of like, they're not getting solved soon. Like, I'm not like
deeply entrenched problems.
Yeah. It's not just like one bill's going to get passed and like, yay, everything's fine now. So like, to the point, like, so now I'm against capital punishment, at least for pragmatic reasons, because I think innocent people get prosecuted and bad evidence used against them and rhetorical tricks, and people don't understand logic anymore these days. Like, there's all these different things going on for me. Like, I'm with you. The criminal justice system is messed up. Is it messed up in the same ways? Like, it doesn't sound like it. I don't know. But like, I would need someone to be able to explain to me, here's how they're actually the same or like really similar. I'm guessing the American justice system has some kind of big problems, and that the El Salvador system and their, you know, culture around that system is even worse, where they're even less, you know, innocent until proven guilty. And some of these different kind of important pillars of the American criminal justice system. And so there's possible ways to make these arguments, and it's just never how it's done. Like, there's ways for a person to effectively make this argument in theory. If the facts actually line up with what they want the facts to be, then that's going to be a question. But usually what happens is a lot of either unintentional oversimplifying of all these details and facts, or maybe sometimes intentional obfuscation of the facts, so they can say, hey, here's this really horrible thing going on in deepest, darkest Africa. Therefore, we need to be doing all of this here in America. Like, there's this like little thing in that video, or we didn't talk about this because there's not a lot to say besides that's dumb, but it's like this thing, like in one sentence, they're like, and then abstinence education started happening and rape started happening a lot. And I'm like, what do those two things have to do with each other?
There's a lot of obfuscation happening there. I think that's an important point, Josh. And I think one of the problems with obfuscation is you wind up with like an unclear argument. You have like you have like like obfuscation is a great way to make an emotional argument. and a terrible way to make a logical argument.
It might be a great way to make a persuasive, like rhetorically effective
persuasive,
argument.
emotional argument, but not a good logical argument.
Right.
And here's the missing piece that's being lost in the obfuscation. Therefore, this bad conclusion of this law is inevitable.
Yeah.
What is the argument that conclusion is inevitable? So with something like socialism, the argument is something like, well, so Reagan said the problem with our friends, the socialists, is is Margaret Thatcher. The problem with socialists is you always run out of other people's money. That's the argument. And whether that's true or not, I don't care. That's not the point right now. But that is an argument that it's an inevitable conclusion.
Right.
Whichever country does it, eventually they have a kind of downward spiral of like using up whatever money they have, or using up their resources. And then eventually they don't have anything to pull from. And now you've got things in a really bad spot. That's the argument. Could be true, could be false, but at least it's an argument. In the case of euthanasia, the argument is something like, because of the way the interests line up, you have an inevitable push for encouraging the family members to volunteer to die because of the scarcity of resources. And that's a complicated argument all by itself, but at least that's how the argument is structured.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like with these abortion laws in other countries, the argument, like there's no argument along those lines. It's look how bad it is. People hate women. Therefore, this is going to happen in America too, or like something like that. And especially if you have what it appears to be the case based on what we know of El Salvador, you have a country with a criminal justice system that is so weak, they ignore evidence. They flagrantly, openly ignore evidence. You don't have a very clear, people are innocent until proven guilty system. Given that distinction, you cannot possibly make a good argument that this bad consequence of El Salvador, this alleged bad consequence, is inevitable in America because our system does not do those things. That's clearly a causal factor here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So everything comes down to, what is the argument that this bad consequence is an inevitable result? And in the case of the abortion thing, they can't make that case.
So that's critically important to understand. That's more important than the side point I'm about to make, but just as like an add-on, less important thing. There's also really good evidence that the people making these arguments are not being intellectually honest, because those same people will often use the opposite reasoning when it benefits their cause. And so I'll just give this one example of this. So I was actually in the Netherlands once debating with people about euthanasia. It was not a great time, but it's a thing that I did. I was really young and I did this thing. And I remember coming back to America and every once in a while talking about assisted suicide stuff. The Oregon law was like relatively recent. And so, people were talking about this. And I remember making some pragmatic arguments against like here's what happened in the Netherlands because they went first. So here's some things that have happened. We know, for example, from doctors in the Netherlands that while the law specifically said, like the people in the Netherlands, they are so proud of this, or my experience of talking to people is they're so proud because we're so forward thinking, and you dumb Americans or these other countries where how like we're forward thinking, we've done this thing, and don't worry, we have all these safety checks in place. We have it in the law that you've got to have like 2 doctors sign off and 3 family members, and of course the person that who wants to be euthanized, and like all these different checks going on. And then I get back home and I'm doing some research and I find all these doctors in the Netherlands saying it's out of control. We can't stop it. There's they say that the safety checks are happening, but it's not what's going on. Sometimes, a lot of times, the person being euthanized didn't even want to be euthanized. It was just a doctor and the scarcity of resources thing, a doctor, he needed the bed kind of a thing. So I remember making that argument to someone. It's not the only argument against euthanasia, but I was making that specific argument to this American who was like pro, like all the states in America should have euthanasia. And so I described like, here's this thing, like you think you can control it, but you might be overly optimistic was my point. And he was like, oh no, we're America. We'll just do it better. And I was like, first of all, how do you know?
That doesn't answer the problem. Like
no.
You've made a case that this is inevitable. So the pro-assisted suicide person needs to say, okay, I grant you that issue, and here's the fix.
Right.
Here's the thing that can stop it from being inevitable, and then you need to engage with that. You can't just say, we'll do it better.
But notice the move. Doctors. It's the opposite of the El Salvador thing, where they're saying, no, this is this naturally happens. So you've got to have this thing. And here I'm saying, no, here's this thing that naturally happens. They're like, oh no, we can do it better. It's like pick principle. Like what I think it's people being intellectually dishonest that are reasoning backwards. They're doing ad hoc reasoning. They know what conclusion they're trying to argue for, and they're just going to use whatever crappy reasoning that is in their head to make their point.
And unlike that arrogant person you were talking with where, oh, in America, we're just going to do it better. I feel like I'm doing something different here. We're saying actually illegal abortion in America could work because we have different resources and education built up.
Yeah.
We have a very strong pro-life movement who wants to educate about, even just fetal development, and even philosophical arguments for why abortion is wrong.
Yeah.
We've developed pregnancy resource centers, and they don't have that in these other countries because they've never had necessarily the same sort of battleground going on.
Yeah.
And there's some good that's come in the last, 40, 50 years of battleground where we're fighting for against abortion. Things have been put in place. And so if you just have abortion illegal and that's it, there's not necessarily as much motivation.
The infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. There's not as much motivation to educate and try to get the message out there and even develop like PRCs.
Yeah.
So I think, the alternatives to abortion and things that we've developed are a really good thing in evidence for our argument of actually it would be different in America.
And another good thing that we have I don't know what the situation in El Salvador is with people being upset about the criminal justice system, but I know in America, like, there is this growing sense from a lot of people that there's problems with the criminal justice system. Like we're not alone when we talk about these problems here. Like how many Netflix documentaries are there now and like huge podcasts on like the true crime kind of podcasts that basically in the end they're saying, here's someone who got prosecuted. Here's the evidence and the arguments that were used and how bad was that? And either this person is now being retried. So like some of these podcasts have caused people to end up getting like new appeals that like they thought they were out of appeals and now they're getting an appeal because basically there's this vocal outcry from society. There's like, all right, that was not okay, the way that was handled. You've got a growing sense of we want things to be better. Here are some like being able to even point clearly. Here are some problems. Like there's one Netflix documentary, I forget what the name was, but I heard about it on the Hello Internet podcast. And it's like, here's these cases of people that are, probably in jail and they shouldn't be in jail because of bad like interrogation techniques. Right. And they did this whole thing about how like this one or maybe these two guys ended up in jail because like it was this weird situation where like the crime happened in Canada, whatever happened in Canada. They think that this kid did it, but he crossed the border. And then they use Canadian interrogation techniques that aren't even legal in America, but they use them in America because there's like, hey, it's a Canada crime. It's like Canada is Canadian prosecutors. So like they kind of like did this thing where basically they're totally lying to the kid and trying to get this confession out of him by pretending to be this like mob lord. But there's like totally sensical reasons why the kid would just make up a story to like show off and like think he's getting into this really good, situation or he's scared or whatever. Like there's like other reasons why he might be giving a false confession. We make that illegal. So we try not to get, or we minimize false confessions. The point is like people see that. And the way it ends is dude's in jail. He's in jail and he's used up all of his appeals. And like the way that everyone, I think just about everyone watching this is like, dude needs to get another appeal. No one's watching these things and is like, oh, I love the American criminal justice system. Like all of these documentaries, and a lot of them are really good, and I don't think are super deceptive as far as I can tell. Like the wave is toward that. I don't know if that's what's going on in El Salvador, but that's good news for the future of criminal justice in America.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recently rewatched what you're talking about. Kind of reminds me of when I was recently rewatching the first couple seasons of The Practice on Hulu. It's a show from quite a while ago, very dated in some ways, but very, very interesting lawyer drama show. And there's this kind of running theme where you've got this one lawyer, Eugene, who is just very, very good at getting guilty people off. Like people he just knows are guilty. He's very good at getting them off. And there's all of this like, you're a bad person, kind of like pressure that he gets for this. And there is a really incredible episode where he got really mad at the judge for some reason. He ended up like contempt in court. He's in jail and he's talking with his son, and it kind of ties the plot together at some level. It's like, this is why I do what I do. The reason I'm so aggressive at pushing for even like using technicalities to get criminals off is because I had like an uncle or somebody who was put in an interrogation room for like 20 hours and wasn't given like food and like forced to drink water and not allowed to use the bathroom and all of these like horrible interrogation techniques until finally he confessed, and then he went to jail. And so the reason I do what I do is I make the police officers obey the rules, because if they don't obey the rules, I'm going to get the guy off. Like this is the reason why is like, it was a really interesting take on the, like what I always like, I'm totally like with the people hassling this lawyer. It's like, yeah, this is totally gross. These are mobsters that are flagrantly, obviously getting off. But the other side of it is by doing such a good job of getting them off on technicalities, that also puts pressure on the police. They can't do these tricks.
Yeah.
They can't do bogus interrogations, illegal interrogations or illegal searches in order to try to get people in jail. Is that it actually comes around and it protects the innocent people too.
And we just need more things like that. We need more rules for how, the police interrogations should go and the use of evidence and all of those things. So again,
and golly day, if you're in an interrogation room, say the word lawyer and shut up. Like just be a smart person.
Lawyer, want lawyer.
Right.
That's it. Don't say anything else.
So I want more attention to be given to these situations. And I want, the innocent people, if they're there, to be let out. And I want them to get more appeals.
Of course.
But I also really want people who disagree with me to stop using deceptive tactics in videos like this to, spew what else can you call it? Fake news.
Yeah. I mean,
around.
And that should be one of the takeaways of this podcast is like 5-minute videos made by propagandist advocates. Don't trust everything they say.
Yeah.
And that goes to some extent, like that's fair with Equal Rights Institute.
Mm-hmm.
If we put out a 5-minute video and it's like cleverly edited and it's like, we've got words on the screen and we've got emotional music and all of this stuff. I mean, like, check the facts.
Yeah.
There's obviously we have a bias. Like none of us are denying that we have a bias. Right. We have a view. We think abortion is wrong.
Right.
And so because of just the inevitable pull of bias on perspective, of course, it's possible that we make mistakes. We definitely try not to. We're very careful with our content. But it's a true principle that applies to everyone, including ourselves. Yeah. Don't let yourself be suckered by a 5-minute video that uses emotional music and the whole 9 yards. You got to check the facts.